we found that if you consume the plant material, you actually see about a 40-fold increase in bioavailability. Artemisinin, we found that the essential oils help to solubilize the artemisinin a bit. And so that made it more soluble. When it's more soluble, it can go through the chemistry in the body a little bit better.
Welcome to the Wild Herbs Podcast, where we unpack and uncover the healing properties of wild herbs so you can heal naturally with the plants beneath your feet. I am your host, April Punsalan, wild untamed plant lady, also a botanist, an ethnobotanist, and herbalist dedicated to teaching you how to heal with plants. If you want to learn edible and medicinal plants, you are in the right place, my friend. I am deeply honored to welcome Dr. Pam Weathers. She is a biology and biotechnology professor with Worcester Polytechnic Institute.
Yeah.
She is an internationally recognized expert on Artemisia annua, sweet wormwood, and artemisinin. She has researched and worked with this plant for 25 plus years in her lab with undergraduate and graduate and PhD students. She has written and published over 130 peer-reviewed journal articles on this plant and its phytochemicals. So it is truly an honor to have you on the Wild Herb Podcast today. Thank you so much for your time.
Sure, no problem. It's actually 130 articles. It includes some other areas that I worked on earlier than Artemisia, but thank you.
130. That is very impressive. I have one peer-reviewed journal article that I've published. So 130 is very impressive. It's a good contribution to the scientific community. So you have been working with this plant for 25 years. You know it so well. How did you get started working with sweet wormwood, Artemisia?
So I started in the early 1990s, and I shifted to that because I could not get students to come into my lab to do research on plants. They thought plants were boring, which of course they're not. Not that I'm biased. And when I switched to this medicinal plant, really very little was known about it at that time, certainly in the published literature. Okay, so obviously there's a 2,000-year history in the Chinese materia medica on this plant. So that's how I got going on it. And we first started working with trying to grow what are called transformed roots in culture to make more of the artemisinin. And that was actually a very silly approach because it would make the product way too expensive. And it ignored the fact that there are so many other phytochemicals in the entire plant that play a role. And so we abandoned that later on. But that's where we started, and that got students interested, and my lab started to be able to be more productive because it's very hard to do any work if you don't have students who are joining the project and helping to develop new ideas, etc.
I'm glad that you were able to get some students in your lab, and it seems like you've been able to get a lot of students in your lab. Can you tell the listeners that don't know about Artemisia annua, can you tell us about it and its traditional use in Asia?
So Artemisia annua originates or evolved, it seems, in Southeast Asia. And there, as recorded in the Materia Medica of the Chinese, and that dates back 2,000, actually more than 2,000 years now. So that's a written documentation of its medical use. And it was used to treat fever. And it is thought that was probably malaria, which was endemic to the region. And that's how ultimately in 2015, Yu Tu was given the Nobel Prize in Medicine for isolating and identifying the active molecule artemisinin as being the primary component in treating malaria through the use of this, plant. And she had gone back through that materia medica to try and understand how, first of all, what plants were there to treat malaria, and secondly, now how were people doing it at that time and taking things and wringing them out and getting the juice from it. It was a very primitive and old way of doing things, but it gives you clues on where you might be able to identify some of the chemistry that's involved in the activity of this plant.
It's fascinating. Yeah, I looked up its range before the podcast, and it's mostly old world species, but its range, it shows, well, in Kew Botanical Garden database, everywhere in the United States, maybe one or two states. So it's even in South Carolina. I have not found it here where I live, but I feel like I might have seen it. I know I saw a lot of Artemisia when I lived in the mountains of Western North Carolina. So do you know, does it like more mountainous regions or coastal?
So there's a difference in talking about where it's cultivated, because it's
Mm-hmm.
broadly cultivated worldwide. And so that can be confusing in terms of what you're actually talking about. So there's wild species of Artemisia, and there are a lot of different Artemisias, and sometimes it's difficult to tell some of them apart. But in terms of cultivated Artemisia, it grows very well around the globe, spanning the equator, so the equatorial regions, which is important. That's where malaria is primarily located. And it also goes up into the subtropics as well as our areas up here, probably even north of us, but we can only grow it once a year because it's an annual. And when winter hits, it's going to die out. But the important thing is we grow it here every summer. I grow a crop.
Mm.
But I get one crop, whereas down in Florida, where it's being now commercially produced, they can grow it year round. All right. But when you think of a wild plant versus these crops that are being grown in agriculture, the wild plants can have totally various, you just don't know what the phytochemistry is. And in fact, we had to develop a reasonable protocol for growing the plant for our experiments, because otherwise we were getting huge error bars and we couldn't make sense out of our data.
Mm.
So what we did is this plant, if you take cuttings of it, it roots very easily. And so we just do this clonal propagation through rooted cuttings. So it's not tissue culture, it's just rooted cuttings. We keep them in tissue culture, but we do this rooted cuttings, and that's how I propagate it every year. That's how it's being propagated in Florida. If you let the plant go to flower and have sex, then you're going to have all this gene mixing, and that's what happened. And that's why you couldn't get consistent. What you're going to collect in the wild probably is totally different and may not be effective. So it's very
Wow.
important to understand. I would not trust anything I collected in the wild.
Wow.
It took a lot of effort to get to the point where it could be grown consistently. And even in the equatorial regions of Africa, they would not be able to grow the plant we grow up here because it would grow really short and immediately flower. So it has a different flowering photoperiod trigger. And they have specially isolated plants that will grow in the equatorial region of Africa and grow to 6 feet tall. So they get a lot of biomass to make tea or to extract artemisinin. So it has to be the right cultivar.
That's interesting. I wonder, did you notice any trends? Because I noticed, because I was reading, it's the trichomes, it's the hairs, and so that have the artemisinin. I'm probably not going to pronounce that very well,
Yeah.
and that's fascinating to me because I started to notice this trend with hairy plants, right? Quote unquote, Naphthylium, pseudo-Naphthylium, Molin, right? The ones that are so good for the respiratory system are very hairy. So I started thinking it has to be these hairs. So when I read that the medicine was in the trichomes, I thought, wow, now that is fascinating. And so I've noticed just from botanizing that plants in full sun, right, they have generally tend to have more hairs because the hairs are reflecting, or I guess you would say, deflecting the sunlight. And so I wonder if you saw any trends and the phytochemicals, the medicinal phytochemicals, and the different types of habitat, sunny versus shady.
We haven't done specific experiments in that area, but on Artemisia annua, there are 2 types of hairs,
Mm-hmm.
trichomes, let's call them trichomes. And there are ones that are shaped like a T and others that are like what they call them, they're the globular trichomes, or they are like multiple cells packed together and they look like a multi-cell balloon.
Mm.
Those are the ones that have a lot of the phytochemicals of interest. The T hairs also do. Now the plant does this, it makes these things because plants are sessile. They can't run around like animals and get away from something. So somebody comes to munch on them, all they have is chemical warfare, and they're very good at it. And so you munch on it, you break those things and release these really nasty tasting or maybe toxic compounds, and that's your mechanism of defense. So that's what the plants are doing. They also will produce a lot of flavonoids, and that can be impacted by light or shade. I mean, I will give you a good example is the cultivar we grew up here is also the one being grown in Florida. We gave them that so they could get started. But they have to give it a light treatment just to manage the photo period. Otherwise, it will flower too soon. But while we knew what the phytochemistry here was over many crops grown outdoors year after year, it changed down there and they got higher same artemisinin content essentially, but higher flavonoids because in Florida, the sun is more intense and flavonoids can act like a little bit of a sunscreen for the plant. And hey, I'm going to put on some sunscreen so I don't get too much UV damage, right? Smart too. It took
Yeah.
a couple of propagation generations, the rooted cuttings, and we could see the shift in the plant contents.
That is fascinating. And so you touched on, which I love, how the plant overall has these other phytochemicals that make the traditional use more effective and the treatment against malaria, which I know you know so much about because that's what your research is focused on, more effective than just the isolated phytochemical artemisinin. And so can you talk to the listeners about, from your research background, how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts? That because you go into any health food store and so many phytochemicals are isolated. And we tend to do this in our culture, I feel. And so, or in the United States. And for people to realize that the whole plant is really important to get the whole plant into your body. And even thinking about like supplements, like vitamins and different things. Can you tell us a little bit from your research why it is more important to work with the whole plant and all the phytochemicals than just one isolated phytochemical?
Okay, first of all, that's a huge area of study to
Mm-hmm.
really understand that thoroughly. We've scratched the surface. So we always lately have been comparing the pure artemisinin drugs, the ones that are found in the plant, the one that is found in the plant, artemisinin, plus the approved drug derivatives, artesunate, dihydroartemisinin, artemether. Those were made to make artemisinin more bioavailable in the patient because artemisinin is not very bioavailable. And they do a better job. However, we found that if you consume the plant material, you actually see about a 40-fold increase in bioavailability. Artemisinin, just artemisinin is all we were looking at because you got to have something to track, to measure. And that was done in mice to understand that. And that has been an intriguing thing. So we began to look at that more thoroughly. So when you take food into your body, it goes through your digestion, and then it ultimately goes into your liver, etc. All these things are getting passed on until it enters the bloodstream, right? So just to simplify it. So we did some simulated digestion studies in the laboratory, comparing the two. And then we grew intestinal cells on a membrane to mock up the intestine. And you put the mixtures on top of the intestinal cells and you see what passes through. And we found that when you had the plant material, more artemisinin passed through just from artemisinin alone. So those were really important first findings. But then it has to go to the liver. So then we used what are called these aren't cells, they're called liver microsomes. And the liver microsomes they have all the enzymes from the liver, but you can't grow them because they don't have a nucleus. Okay, so they don't grow. But you can get a lot of them, and you get them from a pool of 200 people because everybody has different enzyme levels. And then you can subject those liver microsomes to your extracts and pure drugs. And you could say, okay, Now, I want to look at some of the liver enzymes to see how they're metabolizing artemisinin from the plant mixture or the pure drug. And we found that we were getting big inhibition of what are called the P450s in the liver that normally metabolize artemisinin. And so that suggested that inhibition of those enzymes was allowing the drug to sail through the liver and into the blood because it wasn't getting metabolized as much. So then we did further experiments to say, are we inhibiting those enzymes at the level of mRNA, in other words, where the message comes out of the nucleus to make the enzyme and then gets translated into a protein? We looked at all those steps and we were finding the plant material was inhibiting multiple steps. And that explains how you get so much of it processed through the liver very quickly, such that the pure drug enters the bloodstream better from the plant material than when just delivered as a pure drug. Because the pure drug was getting metabolized. That was
It,
well known. So
so
that kind of explains a little bit in a very small amount of the human body.
So the pure drug was getting, and you did such a good job explaining that. Thank you. The pure drug is getting metabolized by the liver, and so it's not able to enter into the bloodstream and benefit the body as well.
As well. You don't get as much of it. So it's
Mm.
an amount. You got to think about what's my dose. You're getting lower dose that's actually entering into the bloodstream, which is what you need in order to combat whatever the ailment is, whether it be malaria, schistosomiasis, tuberculosis, whatever. There's a lot of things that Artemisia is effective against. And that's what we have been looking at overall, always comparing the two.
Yes. And so, from your experience, for someone listening that wants to work with it, because it's antimicrobial, right? Does
Yeah,
it
to
hurt?
an extent, yes.
So,
Not,
it
it's not a panacea.
right, it's not a panacea. Although I will tell you this, which I would love to hear your feedback, is that it's almost in every anti-parasitic worm medicine that you can find. I just ordered one and it has sweet wormwood in it, Artemisia annua, and it says on there the non-toxic kind. And you see that everywhere. And so but does it really work on killing intestinal parasites?
It seems to be in the literature quite effective against quite a few different types of parasites. Most of those are parasites common to the developed world, although we see with the immigrant population coming in, they may come in with parasitic diseases and our doctors don't know how to treat them because they don't have experience with them. It's very
Mhm.
difficult for them to even recognize that they have this problem. And we may see more of that emerging with climate change. So some of those are brought in by, depends on the vector. So if it's mosquito driven, we're already seeing native cases of malaria in the US, which we have not had since DDT eradicated it. So that's quite concerning. And nobody quite is sure where those came from. They weren't from travel. It wasn't a traveler case. Normally you see most of them from travelers. You went to Africa, you got infected, you came back, now you've got malaria.
It has, what do you think, what are the properties that kill? Does it kill the actual parasitic worm or does it kill the eggs? Do you know? Artemisia.
In many cases, it is actually killing the worm
Mhm.
itself. And if you continue treatment long enough, even though you may expel eggs, eventually there will be no more eggs.
Oh, because you're killing the worms.
Yes. And so that's important to realize. You can't just take a dose and assume you're okay. There was a case in Florida last year. I happened to interact with this individual. There were two people actually, and they had schistosomiasis for years. They think they had picked it up in South America, I believe, when they had done a visit years ago. And they started taking Artemisia as encapsulated powdered dried leaves. It's provided by this company. It's a little company down in Florida, out of Miami. His name is Atelier Temenos. And I can put that in the chat if you like, or
I
send it
would
back.
love that. Yes.
And they have been took that for a number of months. It's a very benign, doesn't hurt the liver. In fact, there's evidence suggesting it helps the liver. I can tell you about that in a minute. And they finally eradicated the schistosomiasis, but If you could start it sooner after infection, that's much better. They had a long-term infection, so they were really having a lot of problems. That parasite had really was in a lot of their system.
What kind of symptoms did they have?
I don't know if I remember exactly, but you would have to look that up.
Okay.
And sorry, I'm a
I'm just
biologist.
curious. I'm just curious because I went to South
Yeah.
America about 5 years ago, Brazil, in the Northwest Indigenous Territory. And I feel like I could have picked something up from there. And I've gotten my stool tested multiple times, and it's always, no, nothing. And I'm like, I think you guys, I don't know, something's just not right. And so that's, and when you said that, I was like, I think I
Yeah.
need to take sweet wormwood for a couple of months and just see if I notice a change, and what I'm a little suspicious about. But anyway, back to sweet wormwood. You're saying that it actually, there's a little bit of evidence that it supports the liver. Can you talk about that? And then maybe also the kidneys?
Okay, so the liver, which is of course critical because that's where we process so many things that enter our body. And there was concern over the years. There'd been a report or two wondering if there was some liver toxicity. We have never seen any, and all our studies show that everything seems to be beneficial. But I think it was in 2020, and I can send you the reprint. There was a human trial done by Han et al. And they were actually looking and comparing the efficacy of Artemisia annua in patients who had fatty liver disease.
Mm,
And so they were finding that they had dramatic improvement in their liver enzymes and their health overall after a 2-month treatment.
that's
And
great.
that was pretty incredible, and no adverse side effects. No one is really, none of the work I've seen anywhere has it reported any adverse side effects. I myself have treated myself with Artemisia for 2 to 3 months on end. And that was because I had really bad case of Lyme disease, and I can tell you more about that
Mm.
too. And I never noticed any ill effects, and I was dosing myself 3 times a day and felt perfectly fine. But there was the only thing that got rid of the Lyme when I finally had a advanced case. So I think that, yeah, it's really safe and doesn't seem to bother the liver. In fact, maybe help the liver, may actually help the liver. One would need a lot of studies to say, oh, yeah, it's really beneficial. But that one study was quite compelling.
So you treated yourself with Artemisia annua for Lyme disease, and you said that you were dosing 3 times a day. Is that 2 capsules 3 times a day? Can you talk to us about how you did it?
Yeah, I use 3 capsules. These are basically the same material. I pack my own capsules, but it's the same plant as down in Florida. It's just that I use what I grow because we have so much of it. And so I had a severe case of Lyme that only was diagnosed by accident. This was in early 2016. It was the middle of winter. I was surprised I had Lyme. I thought I had bad flu.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I went to Minute Clinic and said, I've got this sort of paralysis going up my face. And they said, "Will you go to the ER?" And I go, I don't want to go to the ER, but I did. And it's good I did, because then they actually took some blood samples. They couldn't figure out what it was, but of course they were worried it was a stroke. But it was progressing Lyme. And so they discerned it was Lyme. I started doxycycline for 3 weeks. And after 2 weeks, I was better, but I could tell I wasn't going to be cured. And I was worried about getting long-term Lyme. So of course I dove into the literature and found that there were some reports by some investigators at Johns Hopkins showing that artemisinin was effective against the persistent form of Lyme. So you can have rapidly growing Lyme and then it slows down. It's much harder to treat because it's not growing like it usually does. And drugs only last in your body for a certain length of time. And I will tell you, doxycycline is not a fun drug. It does work on the early stages of Lyme, but I was progressed. I had already had Lyme for probably 6, 8 weeks at that point. And so I asked my PCP, can I just start taking Artemisia? And they said, oh, okay, but don't stop the doxy. So I overlapped the doxy for 1 week and then continued taking. I started taking and took it for about 2 months. the Artemisia. And by the end of the 2 months, every single symptom was gone. Now,
That's awesome.
more recently, I tried this again, only this time I had the tick bite and I thought, oh, I've got Lyme again. I'm going to start the Artemisia. It did not work in the early stages. So I had to go get some doxycycline, started the doxycycline, and then could tell it was still there, repeated the same thing. So it seems to work best on the persistent form of Lyme rather than the early stage. So I think the combination of doxycycline and Artemisia were actually really good because I've had Lyme probably 5 times, but
Gosh.
only twice badly. We have a lot of it up here and I'm outside a lot, so I get it.
And where do you live again?
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, yeah.
Yeah.
Northeast, yeah. I'm glad you figured out a protocol. That's important.
Yeah, and I figure I'll just keep experimenting on myself until I figure out what works.
Yeah, there you go. I appreciate you sharing with the listeners because I have had a couple of students that have Lyme disease. And actually, my brother, my sister-in-law, she had struggled with Lyme disease. So it's good to know that there are things that you can combine with tradition, or I guess you could say Western medicine.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
Artemisia has strong oils and it smells very aromatic. And some strong plants with strong oils can irritate the kidneys. Do you think that someone with kidney disease or weak kidneys could actually take Artemisia if they had Lyme disease or intestinal parasites?
I don't know. And the reason I'll say that is I'm not sure what's going on with the kidneys. We
Hmm.
haven't actually studied that per se, but we did do a distribution study in rats. And we looked to see where did artemisinin go in these rats that were being fed the dried material versus a pure drug. And we could never really find much in the kidneys. If anything, it was barely a trace amount, whereas we could find a lot in the lungs, the brain,
Mm.
heart, the muscle, and there was nothing in the testes or the ovaries. We did both male and female rats. So it may not distribute to those areas, to those
Interesting.
organs. Yeah. So I don't know what to tell you about kidneys. I would say,
That's okay.
yeah, anybody who's dealing with kidney disease should follow probably whatever their physicians are recommending because I don't know about this plant.
Yes, that's good advice. And in terms of taking it, some people do tea, some people do capsules, some people do tinctures. Do you think there is a preferred method for Artemisia if you were trying to treat intestinal parasites or Lyme? What form is the most effective?
I don't think anybody should use a tincture. I think it concentrates too much of the essential oils, which I could also be toxic. Okay. But traditionally, it has always been used as a tea. And we've described many times how that's prepared in all of our studies so that it's very consistent. And it's being used across equatorial Africa through the auspices of La Maison d'Artemisia, which is an NGO out of Paris that has helped to get all these small scale little operations in place that are consistently growing a good variety of Artemisia that they can use locally to help treat for malaria. It's been very successful. So that's the traditional mode. I personally can't stand the taste of it. So I want it in a capsule. We do powdered dried leaves in a capsule, and I could tolerate that. If a person can't swallow a capsule and hates the taste of tea, you could empty a contents of a capsule in applesauce or something and shove it in your mouth, swallow it to hide the taste. It's interesting because we did a little study, very unofficial little study, where we had the tea available for a whole group of people coming in to visit on a science day. And there were kids and adults. And they said, "Do you want to try this herbal tea?" And so everybody was trying it. And then we'd say, "Now, what does it taste like?" And about 25% of the people, and there were over 300 people, thought it tasted great. Some thought, I don't notice anything. And some, like me, were like, this is awful. So there are tasters and non-tasters of the tea. That's what we discerned, which is not surprising either.
Do you think that you get more of the phytochemicals into your body by eating the capsule versus the tea? I'm just wondering how it's metabolized because I feel like when you're drinking the tea, I always do like a teaspoon of a plant teaspoon to a tablespoon of dried to 1 cup of hot water, and you're drinking that, you're not getting all the phytochemicals in the plant, but I guess you're getting what, because you said they're doing that traditional treatment in parts of Africa and it's effective. But then the capsule, you're getting all the plant, but you're eating it, your body has to digest it. Where I feel like a tea versus a capsule is a little bit different in terms of how it moves through the body. So I don't know if you have any comments on that. Because in my mind, I'm trying to think it through, but I don't have enough knowledge to really understand how those two would be different. But I'm always curious what is more effective or how they're different.
Clearly, if you make a tea, it's a hot water extract. And so whether you use water, dichloromethane, ethanol, methanol, whatever the solvent is, you're going to get different chemicals out. When you take the whole material, you're getting everything. And yes, you say, now that has to go through my whole digestive process. It might go through a little bit slower, but you're still getting the same compounds. And maybe you're getting other ones that are also helpful. So I would love to have done a comparison study amongst them. I've never been able to win the funding for anything like that. I mean, it's very hard to get any funding for this kind of work. And so whereas you might get things, you could get artemisinin faster from a tea, maybe. How much faster? I don't know. I think the hot water is also probably therapeutically beneficial.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
we drink a warm tea, usually we don't drink iced drinks, usually, unless we have a sore throat and it's an unanswered question in terms of a direct comparison.
I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your expertise in that in terms of just one, we don't have enough knowledge. We don't know all the way, but two, it might take a little longer, but you might get some more phytochemicals. Because personally, I feel that for some of these Artemisia are very kind of bitter plants, capsules are easier. It's easier just to take and swallow and get it into your body than taking the time to make the tea. Because I'm a big tea person and I've taken most of my medicine in tea form. And so I've just now started doing the capsule forms with herbs. And I would like to get to the point where I actually am making my capsules, but I'm not there yet. Just a time thing. But sometimes I'll see them at Earth Fair or Whole Foods, like the gel capsules, and I'm always like, don't do that. Maybe one day, but it makes me feel more confident hearing that you've had a positive results taking capsules and that it is going to go through your body and you're going to get the benefits the same way that you would a tea. So anyway, thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned that it's hard for you to get funding and your lab has been focused predominantly on plants, Artemisia. And you had mentioned the NIH. Can you tell the listeners what is NIH and how they determine who gets funding for plants, or maybe why our country is a little bit behind on using some effective plant medicine for treating common ailments? So anyway, I might not be asking the question the best way, but can you tell us your experience getting funding for plant-related experiments and maybe to your colleagues?
Right. First of all, I work also on Artemisia afra, which is native to Southern Africa. It's an interesting close relative of Artemisia annua, but it's a perennial. It's also being grown in Florida. It has no artemisinin, and yet it's proving to be highly effective against many of the same diseases, which is very interesting. And that includes tuberculosis and malaria and other diseases. But just to let you know that. I've been looking for funding, usually from the NIH. Occasionally, we've had some donations of funds from private sources or private individuals. So normally with NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health, and they fund all of the health-related research out of the federal government. And one would submit a proposal describing what you are planning to do, what your experiments are, how you're going to control them, what are you looking to learn, how are you going to do it, why is this important, etc. There is really only one small part of NIH that will even consider a botanical product, and that is the National Institutes for Complementary and I'm trying to remember this, NCCIH, Integrative Health. There we go. And they have funded most of our work. We've gotten a little bit from general medicine. We have a little bit from NIH, that's for infectious diseases. We have a little bit for tuberculosis and COVID studies, but the bulk of it's coming from NCCIH. And they don't have a lot of money. They're probably one of the lowest funded parts of NIH. That they're even there is amazing, but they cover all alternative approaches to medicine. So that would mean mind body, it would mean all kinds of different things that have nothing to do with herbal drugs. So it's highly competitive to get the money, and not a lot of money available. A grant of $300,000 sounds like a lot, but to keep my lab running, I need about $75,000 a year. I just can't, and that doesn't that's not an aggressive research program. So the way this works is you submit this proposal. It is reviewed by scientists whose focus is mainly on pure drugs, not necessarily combinations. And so they always are wanting to know what are the active components, how do they work, and give us the mechanism of action. You have to really be careful how you propose the work you want to do, and it has to usually be within that kind of framework. So for example, our most recently funded work on this area that was just in my lab was the work related to how was the liver processing it, digestion, all of that. And so we had to go in and do everything to answer those questions. But to really get to doing work where you might have patients involved costs millions of dollars. You will never get it, not through the NIH for something. At least I don't think you'll ever get it. I wish we could. I wish it was fundable, but it is part of the Western bias in medicine and science towards the way we think about therapeutics, etc. And it's very profit driven. There's not a lot of profit in growing a plant and giving it to people as powdered material. One would think this is something that should be taken up by a lot of the large charitable organizations, but that's not necessarily true. That's not necessarily what they want to do. They also are focused more with a Western approach to medicine and science in their minds. But it is very challenging.
Do you think that there could be a change in future generations where the people start demanding it more? Or maybe we start seeing a transition where people are buying the supplements more and not taking what the doctor is prescribing for common ailments, just common things that can heal better with plants than maybe Western medicine.
Yes, it would require a lot of grassroots lobbying efforts, frankly. And there's another issue, though. You have to realize that the supplement industry is not well regulated. In fact, I would say it's not regulated, except other than that little caveat at the bottom says the FDA has not approved this. And there is garbage out there, so much garbage. We have done analysis of many samples of plant material, supposedly Artemisia annua, supposedly with artemisinin contents of a certain amount. Many times we find, it might claim, say, 300 micrograms of artemisinin, and we find 0.
Ooh. So
it is, and that's part of the reason. So you're fighting this element that is fraudulent, but you're also, that fraudulent element is causing Western medicine and science to say, see, it's garbage. Because if you go and use something like that and you get no therapeutic response, of course it's garbage. But that doesn't mean the plant doesn't work. It means you fed them garbage.
Right.
And so it really needs, I think, and I know people don't like to hear regulation, but this does need regulation. It needs to be regulated to the point where it says, if you claim something on this label, you better be ready to back it up with data. I'm telling you, it's just, we've had a material from lots of different places sent to us. And in fact, I was just talking to my key person, Melissa, in my lab, and we were saying, we need to publish on some of this, but I can't identify the names or we'll get sued.
No, you couldn't. You would have,
FOABCD.
you definitely would have to do that. But
Yeah.
I would be very interested. Now I'm like, when I get my order in the mail, I want to send it to you. Does it really have? I think it's at 100 micrograms or something of artemisian.
If you want validated material, the stuff in Florida, we validate it. We have, because we have analyzed it for them, and we know that it's consistent and it does have has artemisinin in the Artemisia, and they have both Artemisia annua and afra.
I'm
And
going to order it.
yeah, I'll send you the information. Just if I forget, just send me an email reminder, but I'll try to do that later today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This conversation has been very informative, and I appreciate your time because it's wonderful to talk with an expert that has so many years of knowledge and working with this plant in a lab and studying it and growing it, making medicine with it, treating your own self with it. So you are covering all the bases, which I find so impressive and inspiring. Are there any other elements that you would turn to Artemisia for that, or you think that is a element that someone could turn to it and see an improvement? Any common elements?
The fellow who's growing it in Florida has had arthritis. I don't know if it's rheumatoid or what, but anyway, he's been using it daily and he said it really has helped, given him a lot more relief. It's Artemisia afra and probably annua too also seems very beneficial in wound healing. We've got some stuff we want to look at in that area. Inflammation, there is a reduction in inflammation. We published on that, and it's well established in the literature that artemisinin, as well as the plant, reduces inflammation. So anything that has an inflammatory aspect to it, you would find that to be beneficial. And the individual who's been taking it for arthritis has been doing that for 2 years, daily for 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, he's not going to quit. He says it's the only thing that's given him consistent relief. And I think he takes it morning and night.
2 capsules, morning and night, or 1?
Oh, I think he's taking 3 in the morning, 3 at night, but I don't know. You could reach out to him. I will give you his contact information. He's
Thank
very
you.
open to talking. He'd be very happy to chat with you about it. His operations and let's see, you're located
In
in,
South Carolina.
so you're not that, you're
Not that
closer
far.
than I am to Miami, which is where he's got his,
Miami.
yeah.
Wow.
So
I'm thankful to have that connection. Yeah, because I bought some. I feel like I definitely need a parasite cleanse. And I bought all these products and I don't know, you know what I mean? Because I didn't make it. And it would be better to grow the plant, make the capsules myself like you do. But knowing that someone's in Florida that has the plant that that has the right phytochemical concentration gives me some reassurance. So I'll definitely be purchasing some from him. Before we close, is there anything else you want to tell the listeners about Artemisia that I might not have asked you? Is there anything? I feel like we covered a lot, but I just want to give you a chance if there's anything I left out or that you feel that listeners need to know.
I would just say for all plants, just remember, just because it's a plant doesn't mean it's safe. If it's natural, it doesn't mean it's safe. You just have to remember that. And this happens to be a safe plant, but many are not, especially when you take them with the whole plant. I have a number of plants where we've extracted drugs. We know they will have a beneficial effect, but if you were to take the whole plant, you'd be deader than the doornail. So you don't want to do that.
No.
But Artemisia, and it's pretty easy to grow, but again, you will not know the phytochemical content. Just because you try to grow it yourself doesn't mean you're going to have a very therapeutically active plant. And that's why we help to get it going down in Florida. And just to let you know, I have no stake in that company. I have no stake in anything. We just help getting them going. We were originally going to use the material to help people with malaria in Haiti, and then Haiti blew up so bad they decided, because they had a lot of contacts in Haiti, it was so bad. So then they turned around and said, let's market to the US. And so he's been slowly building that business. And it's going to be very interesting, some of the other stuff he's got coming out. So
I'm thankful for the connection, and I'm glad that it is available in the US from Florida. And I really appreciate your time and you sharing all your experience and your wide breadth of knowledge with this amazing plant. So thank you for sharing that knowledge with my listeners. And if you want to read more of Dr. Pam's work or learn more about Artemisia, you can go to Google Scholar and you can type in Artemisia and Dr. Pam Weathers, and you'll see all her amazing contributions to science. So in regards to the plant. So thank you again, Dr. Pam Weathers. Thank you for being on the show. And I know my listeners are going to love this as much as I did.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Very nice to meet you. Have a nice
Thank you.
rest of the day and the weekend.
You too.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Wild Herb Podcast. Definitely look at the links at the bottom of the show notes. There is a link to Altera Taminos, and it's where you can get the really good quality Artemisia annua, which is sweet wormwood. I just realized we talked Latin the whole show, but hopefully you know that Artemisia annua is sweet wormwood. And also there is a link if you would like to donate to Dr. Pam Weathers' lab.